Hello and welcome to my review of Light of the Jedi by Charles. I'm going with Soule, it could be Soule, the first novel in the High Republic series that was published in early 2021. The plot begins with a ship called the Legacy Run breaking up in hyperspace. Fragments of it emerge in the Hetzel system, travelling at almost the speed of light and causing havoc sufficient for the government to try and evacuate the whole system. The book is separated into three parts. The first part is almost entirely devoted to the Jedi's rescue attempts. The scale and the fact that this part goes on for so long is probably the source of any claims that you might have seen that this book is action-packed. In the second part, the Jedi and the Republic are trying to predict where the fragments will appear in order to prevent further damage, while our bad guys, the Nihil, who know how to predict them, are attempting to extort money from the system while also trying to kidnap some homesteaders from a wealthy background. Now, in the final part, one of the four leaders of the Nihil attempts to take control of the whole group. The Jedi decide to wipe them out because of all that peace they're the guardian of, and generally nothing much is resolved because anything and everything Star Wars related has to be a trilogy, so there will almost undoubtedly be another two of these books. But if you want reviews of the other two, you'll have to find them elsewhere, because even at this early stage, book one, I don't think that I can read any more of these. Now, I say that because the first line of this book is all is well. So now that we know immediately that all is not well, all is quite the opposite of well. Rather like the incredibly dumb beginning of Attack of the Clones. I guess I was wrong. There was no danger. Oh, Senator, I failed you. No, you didn't. You were quite literally employed to die in my place. But now I know that there's this much danger, I'd better stand around here in the open for a while. So being dumb in Star Wars is not a new thing. But it's interesting because I'd really like to know if the writers are actually this dumb, or if they write like this because it's the best they can do. Or perhaps they write like this because they believe that we, as Star Wars fans, are too dumb to cope with anything that's not battered into us with a mallet. The book is narrated by an internal third-person narrator, and though it is third-person, the viewpoint is restricted enough that it's near the cusp of first-person, especially when it includes various casual inserts that don't really sit well from a less involved narrator. Page 5 is the actual first page of the story, and we know that all is not well because they tell us that all is well twice. After immediately revealing that all is not well, it's better to just get to that not well immediately, but instead we get this, and you can see that there's quite a lot of this, which I'm not even going to begin to read out. In fact, between being told that all is well and the bad appearing, there is 7 pages of text. And towards the end of it, you can really see what I'm talking about the blurring of any boundary that you might put between a narrator and a character. It would only be a pronoun switch, really, to change into an entirely first-person narrative. The third and final all is well seems almost like a writer acknowledged that they've written too much and having zero faith in their audience's attention span. It's been so long since I said all is well, I'd better mention it again in case you've forgotten that all isn't well. All is well, she thought. Gatang, 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 an alarm loud and insistent. Starting the book here would have been just fine. Chapter 2 switches the narrative to Scantek, third class, Mervyn Getter. Now, I'm not so stupid that I can't see that Soule is doing a thing here by reintroducing Mervyn over and over using his rank, but I don't care for it much if I'm honest. It seems facetious in the middle of a galactic catastrophe. The lengthy musings over his non-relationship is equally unnecessary as the captain of the Legacy Run's musing over her various past and the ship that she's flying. But again, this scene blurs the lines between character and narrator, hopefully clarifying what I was saying earlier. We also get these ellipses, which further blurs one character into another. This might work as an idiosyncrasy, but over the course of the novel, this will become hideously overused by almost every character in both narrative and dialogue. When the anomalies start wreaking havoc through the system, one aide tells the government, "What's happening is consistent with some sort of enemy infiltration, but we're not seeing drive signatures, and the locations being hit are pretty random. We do still have some orbital defense platforms out there, and they're all intact. If it's an attack, they should be targeting our ability to strike back, but they're not." Now, infiltrations and attacks are not the same thing, and it's important to be clear. He says it's consistent with an infiltration, but then he describes an attack. It's a bit like saying something is a tree and then describing a road. But what he's also saying is this is consistent with an attack because all the evidence says it's not. Now, you can fix this quite easily by just having somebody say, "Is this an attack?" and the response being, "I don't know." A far simpler exchange that maintains both the mystery and the sort of pace that you should be working at in this early stage of your novel and the scene. Instead, we're getting more and more evidence that this is a writer who keeps feeling like he's got to write something and not really thinking about anything else, like what, why, or how. Another narrator switch, another ellipsis, or two. Another narrator, another pointless diversion, another ellipsis or two. Jedi Master Avar Kriss races to the scene in a blur of ellipsis and reminiscing about her past, probably again to get that pulse racing in the middle of this life or death situation. The woman's name? Avar Kriss, and for most of her 3 decades or so, a member of the Jedi Order. As a child, she came to the great temple on Coruscant, that school and embassy and monastery and reminder of the Force connecting every living thing. She was a youngling first, and as her studies advanced, a Padawan, then a Jedi Knight, and finally, a master. The punctuation here is horrible as well. Is that why we get school and embassy and monastery and reminder of the Force? Not to emphasize the multifaceted role of the Jedi, but because to use a comma to separate this list, school, embassy, monastery, and reminder of the Force, would bring the ratio of punctuation and words in this passage nearer the 1-for-1. The number of people getting into Star Wars through the High Republic is probably negligible. So the need to define the progression through the Jedi ranks just isn't there. But once again, this is not the time or the place for it, even if it was. Just get on with your scene. Bel Zettifar felt the first licks of atmosphere touch the craft. Their vector didn't have a name, not officially. All the ships were basically the same and in theory interchangeable among their Jedi operators, but he and his master always used the same one, with the scoring along the wings from an ion storm they'd once flown through. The pattern looked like starbursts, and so Bel, only in his mind, never spoken aloud, called their ship the Nova. More irrelevance when we're introduced to a new character into this same scene. We are later told that the Jedi ships are maintained by non-Jedi crew, which makes sense, of course, Jedi are probably busy. The lack of names for these ships accomplishes what? Assume then that they don't need one. Their capabilities are defined by the pilot, and instead of saying Red 5, we can just say Luke. What difference would it make? Well, what happens when the pilot is removed? How does the crew identify the ships? Now, I've worked in places where they've had numbers of vehicles, and each one of them always had some sort of unique designation. Fix that ship. Which one? Is this why the ion damage isn't repaired? Because nobody can identify the proper ship. What do you gain from this at this point in the start of this scene? What do you gain from any of this anyway, but particularly here at the point where you're introducing new characters into what is supposed to be an action scene? Later we find that Bel's master knows that he calls the ship that anyway. It's a worthless moment, but that writer's got to write right, or he can't call himself a writer, right? 33 pages in, that's all we are, and every page has demonstrated a real lack of awareness of how to maintain pace and focus. The next page, Bel is talking about the Vectors, the Jedi ship of choice. They look like a flock of birds, or perhaps fallen leaves swirling in a gust of wind, all drawn in the same direction, linked together by some invisible connection, some force. Not some force, the Force. You've just told us that only Jedi can fly them. Bel had seen an exhibition on Coruscant once, as part of the Jedi Temple's outreach programs, 300 vectors moving together, gold and silver darts shining in the sun above Senate Plaza. They split apart and wove into braids and whipped past one another at incredible, impossible speed, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. People called it a drift of vectors. But basically we can also see that the ellipsis is going to be on every page, regardless of character, regardless of whether it's narrative or dialogue. Is there ever going to be a point, do you think, where this might start to lose any effect? Is it after you've used it 406 times in a 380-page novel? 406. Equally, the narrative voice is the same regardless of which character the scene focuses on. The long beam zoomed towards the array at its own top speed, narrowing the distances weapons had to travel, sort of an interesting problem of trajectory and acceleration of physics, something that awakened Bright's own three-dimensional instincts built on a life lived underwater. Again, we're getting the same sort of casual, jokey, matey, not really a narrator tone that's quite grating, but at least this narrator avoids using the ellipsis, right? Right? 1 in 3, he thought. He didn't know exactly what he'd expected, just ... better than 1 in 3 odds that they could actually accomplish their mission. But the anomalies destroying space stations and wrecking moons are one-upped by a runaway compartment from the Legacy's run that contains Tibanna gas, and if it hits the sun, the ensuing reaction will double the size of that star and destroy the entire system. All the Jedi will need to band together, focus their collective conscience to push the tanker aside. So great is the effort that it requires the intervention of almost all the Jedi, including those in other parts of the galaxy, even those still on Coruscant. But it's okay, because Avar called to every other Jedi she could reach, near Hetzel or not. Distance was nothing to the Force. Other Jedi had brought their focus to bear as well, from Coruscant, from across the galaxy. So you set a precedent here, established a rule of law if you prefer. Distance was nothing to the Force. Now, a rule like distance limits the Force, the opposite, could be your protagonist's challenge, if you like, that they would, having taken the hits and been away to learn and grow, come back newly armed to break the rule. But this isn't a prescriptive rule to say this cannot be done. It's a permissive rule to say everything can be done. And if you don't see how that's a problem to your story, then I don't think that I can help you. And I'm not really sure that anybody can. Page 103, she sends Admiral Kranara back to Coruscant to directly report to the Chancellor that hyperspace is sick. But if it's sick, wouldn't it be dangerous for him to use it to get back to Coruscant? Chancellor Soule thinks so, because she shuts down all the hyperspace lanes in the region on receipt of the message. But why does he need to go? Can she not deliver the message using the Force if distance was nothing to the Force? Thank God they didn't have those holograms in the High Republic to communicate across those great distances as well. Except that they do. They explicitly use them later in the book during a Jedi meeting. 3 of the Jedi joining Chris's mind amalgam to move the container to safety are distracted by their efforts, and they crash and die. Why are they moving at all if distance was nothing to the Force? But at least at the moment of greatest peril we are spared the excessive ellipsis, which is getting a bit embarrassing now. Oh. Okay. The reason an author resorts to something this ridiculous is because they're a bad writer. A good writer, for example, will make you feel struggle and tension with words. Have you ever seen a game show where they say, "and the winner is," and then they just pause for ages before telling you? That's what is happening here. It's the same thing, but those game shows are cynical. They use the music to make the moment feel dramatic or exciting. Next time you're watching one, whatever show it happens to be, put your subtitles on and mute the sound and see how awkward and weird it looks, how long and stupid the delay seems. This is the literary equivalent. If you can find an example of Dickens doing this, I will take it back. Until then, I will only accept that this is utter drivel. In books, we can only really work with our words. When they fail us, or as in this case, we fail them, this is the sort of thing that you resort to. The only thing that I can say for Soule is that he's not Chuck Wendig. For this day at least, the light had prevailed. It was over. It was not over. So he is Chuck Wendig. When our enemy appears, Soule uses his words brilliantly, weaving beautiful poetic pictures in our mind. But before the ships could reach their destination, they encountered something strange. It looked like a storm, or a storm cloud perhaps, a massive blue-grey swirl of vapour out in space, dense and threatening. Really, that's the best that you can do. If you can't make your storm seem threatening without saying it's threatening, maybe describe the enemy ships in a really great way. They were ugly, blocky things with spikes protruding from them in no discernible pattern. They looked like tools designed for beating somebody to death. Just for overkill, how about this one from later on? Big debris cloud mushrooming out from the surface, shockwaves starting to roll across the little world. Lots of fire in those dark clouds you got with a really big explosion. Like a storm, kind of. Well, at least he doesn't say anything really stupid like, not a boom, but a boom. It was as if they were trying to rebuild the starship out of pieces of junk they'd found here and there. That was more or less the task, actually. I have nothing left. You've already broken my spirit. Well, actually, I do have something more to say. It's that, and that is that when you get this, it's because it's the best he can do. That's why he uses 5 ellipses on a single page. When does this stop working? It's very hard to work out who the protagonist of this novel is. There are so many candidates for the title, yet the only one with any arc, if you can even call it that, is Bel Zettifar, who needs to work out how the Jedi land safely when they're falling. Yep, that's the character arc. It's great. While he's falling, this is what he thinks. He knew the real challenge was not mastery of the Force, but mastery of fear, always the Jedi's greatest test. The test he was about to fail, and from this height he knew even Loden Greatstorm could not catch him. Distance was nothing to the Force? Maybe the memo didn't reach him? Oh, yeah. Are you starting to see the problem with all permissive rules yet? Are you starting to see the problem with excessive ellipses yet? I hope not. A nice flat from Magito. I like it. Bring in different creatures. It's very ambitious. A few centuries back, we couldn't think about anything but survival. 3 different people speaking in the same way on the exact same page. Perhaps this is why it's so hard to tell who's supposed to be the protagonist in this novel. It goes to great pains to tell us how the characters all look different, but they all act and sound the same. But I'm sure someone in internet land will remind me that ensemble pieces exist. Sure they do. And the good ones are written by people who can write. But the ensemble accusation is hard to deny. There are a lot of different names, though only one character, and that's the consistency throughout all of them. Still need convincing? But some of these names do die. No doubt that will cause some people to draw comparisons with Game of Thrones in space. But there are significant differences. The occasional death here has no impact. Sure, debate me, but only after you've actually read Game of Thrones. Ned Stark is clearly the lead of an ensemble, markedly different from all of the other characters, while Jedi T Army is just one name of many on a piece of paper. Another missile appeared on Mikhail's scopes. Mikhail's Submani watched, his helplessness amplified 1,000-fold. Mikhail slammed his own vector forward, knowing once again that he didn't have time. He reached out with the Force, knowing that through it anything was possible, knowing he could reach the missile chasing T Army's ship. Mikhail almost had the missile. He could feel it, almost as if it were gripped in his hand. He could destroy it. The Force was his ally, and a powerful ally it was. He squeezed the missile, and suddenly in a blast of violent flame it was gone, but not by any action of his. In Act 2, our enemy, the Nihil, attempt to kidnap 4 miners for a ransom. The Jedi race to the rescue. This begins in chapter 22, takes place across 7 more chapters, and comes to a conclusion in chapter 39. Interspersed into all those other chapters is some truly gripping stuff in which other Jedi question businessmen about hyperspace lanes. The Nihil bully an old lady into helping them predict where the rest of the debris from the Legacy Run will appear. 2 Jedi attend the opening of a space station. Using the old lady's info, the Nihil attempt to extort a planet. A man makes a massive array of 57,000 droids in order to predict the location of the debris. The Republic begin tracking the debris as well. The Republic links the Nihil to the original accident. Ro makes his play for ultimate power over the Nihil. There is even an explicit aside, an interlude, where the Jedi decide if it's right or not to kill the Nihil. The book rolls over from part 2 to 3, and Cassiv is sent into a trap by Ro. There's a space battle, which would have been a great place for this to happen if the writer hadn't boringly and pointlessly introduced it earlier at a point where it was far more disservice than service. Stretching out the chase like this over, 7 chapters, over 17, interspersing it with so many different threads, very few of which raise much in the way of interest or match its tone, it sucks all of the excitement out of it. It demonstrates a real lack of awareness in story building, and it's kind of strange to find this happening in anything Star Wars related, because you can watch the documentary on your Phantom Menace DVD to see how George Lucas and Ben Burtt say it should be done.
You go from lamenting the death of, a hero, to escape, to slightly comedic with Jar Jar, to Anakin returning with his little kind of tag. It's a lot, and it's a very short time. Boggles the mind.
God knows the Phantom Menace is not good either, but it is better than this, Jar Jar and all. In conclusion, I found this a really difficult book to like. It fails to maintain or even introduce anything like tension. The descriptive passages are at times childlike. The characters a grey blur of nothing interesting. The writer writes himself into corners and then pretends that they're doors. He is, in short, incompetent, and his overuse of ellipses and awful copying of the "it's over is not over" drivel cliche from Aftermath puts him in the same sort of ballpark as Chuck Wendig. The son of Wendig is not quite as smug or annoying, his story not quite as worthless, but it is still incompetent. I'm sure I'm no longer in the aimed for Star Wars demographic, so your mileage from this book may well differ. However, I have read and enjoyed numerous Star Wars and Star Trek novels, including quite recently. I wanted to sacrifice every page of this to the DNF demons. Now, I suspect there aren't a great many of you that have made it this far, but if you have, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one, particularly if you like and subscribe and ring the bell. Bye.